Okay, so like I said, the first thing you want to do within NLign as an administrator is to create assets. So if you go to Edit Assets, you'll find a list of all the different assets that are currently within your system. And then you can also delete, edit, and add new assets to your database. So just a word of warning, if you ever decide to delete an asset, all of the models and all of the data that are stored on that asset will be deleted out of your database. So be very careful whenever you decide to delete an asset. Make sure that you have any of the trendables, the actual data records, and any of the models that are associated to that asset saved somewhere else if you need them. If you don't, make sure you don't delete that until that occurs. Okay, so as a new NLign administrator, the first thing you're going to want to do is to create an asset. To do that, you click on the plus sign here, and it brings up an asset editor window. And the first thing it's going to prompt you to do is to give this asset a name. So this could be something like maintenance data. We talked in the previous intro class about how some customers divide up their assets by one asset for specific parts of the model or the aircraft, another asset for specific types of data, and so forth. So I've given it a name. Maybe this is my maintenance data. I also have the options to copy any asset folders from a pre-existing asset. So that was the stored views and other folders that I'd set up. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that to copy the asset folders from my pre-existing UAV asset. And then in here will be the list of all the different models that have been loaded for this specific maintenance data asset. So if I click on the plus sign, it will bring me up a window for the model editor. So now I'm prompted with, what's the model that I'm going to be loading for this maintenance data. So I could load a FEM model, I could load a shell, and I could give them, some type of a name that kind of reflects that. So this one I'm just going to call FEM wing model, something like that. And then, NLign supports loading up assembly files. So it's going to ask me one more time to add, to click plus again, to add files to the specific model. So let me just navigate to my file here. So I've got a BDF file that I can load in. And this is a specific wing BDF file. So this is my FEM wing model. It will prompt me if it doesn't auto-detect what the unit of measure is for this file type. I will need to select that from the drop-down list. And then I can also select, do I want to enable damage mapping for this specific model? Sometimes too, if people are having issues with some of their model surfaces and things like that, you can play around with some of the tessellation. You can generate a new tessellation mesh. You can play with the mesh details. So if you're having issues with loading in a specific model, I would recommend playing around with some of the advanced features to try and fix your model. Okay, so now I've got one specific model loaded into my asset of maintenance data. I've got the finite element wing model. So if I want to add other files, I can just click on the model editor button again. If I want to load a 2D model, I can do that as well. So some of our customers think, oh, I can't use NLign because I don't have any, I don't have any CAD models of my aircraft. Well, there's a way that you can actually create a 2D model, and I'll go through some of those steps a little bit later, but for now I'm just going to show you kind of the end of that specific operation here. So I've got a specific JPEG, I've got an NLign model file, and I've got a translation file. So I wanted to use this as an example of how to specify for an assembly, I need to point to the primary file. That's what this primary file option is here. So in the dropdown, I want to make sure that I'm clicking to the highest level assembly file. So this NLign model file references the JPEG and the translation file. So in my assembly, if I have multiple assemblies, I want to make sure that this primary file is the highest level in my assembly tree. So if I load multiple files in here and I click OK, it's going to give me a warning saying multiple files have been selected for the model. And these files will not be loaded unless they're specifically referenced by the primary file. So it's just saying, hey, we've noticed that you have multiple files in here, and unless your primary file points to or references this file, they're not going to be loaded. So that's all that this error message is, or text box is saying here. That's fine. Go ahead and click OK. Once I'm done loading in my models, I can play around with which asset folder they're in. So for example, I can put them into separate asset folders. But like I tell customers, NLign is not really meant to be a PLM system or a configuration tracking system. One thing I did want to point out, though, is that there are many different file types that NLign can natively load. IGES, step files, STL, 3DS, BDF files from like Nastran and Patran. Some of the files that do need a conversion license, though, are CATIA files, NX files, and JT files. There's a specific set of functions you need, or steps you need to go through to create a 2D model. And the first one is to go to Tools, 2D Models, and to select your specific 2D engineering drawing or picture or something of that nature. So go Tools, Create 2D Model, and you can just, if you're following along, go ahead and just point to any type of a picture file you have locally on your computer. So go Tools, Create 2D Model. Go ahead and pick a 2D model, some type of a picture. And hit open. And then NLign will give you this prompt saying to drag between two known points to basically give it a size of this image. So NLign is asking, like, hey, you give me this picture or this engineering drawing. I have no idea what the scale is for this drawing. So if I click and drag between 2 points that I know the distance for, then it'll prompt me, enter the distance between these 2 points. So I can basically give it a scale. So this can be really helpful in an engineering drawing if the scale is printed right onto the engineering drawing. I can just drag between that scale and then enter in whatever that scale is. Or if there's some specific feature that's called out, some measurement lines or GD&T that I can reference, I can click and drag between that and say, that specific measurement is 32 inches or whatever it may be. Then what NLign will do is it will create a NMDL file or an NLign model file from this 2D picture. So I just go ahead and pick a location, and then I save it there. Okay, so I've got the picture, I've got the NLign model file, but next I need to help align this 2D model within 3D space. Because the engineering drawing doesn't exactly have XYZ coordinates to it. So that's what this next step is going to do. I'm going to go to Tools, Model Alignment now. We go to Tools, Model Alignment. And then I'm going to just type in this model name will be a 2D model example. And I need to point to my specific model files. So I've got my NLign model and my JPEG file. And then I want to make the model file my primary file. It gives me the warning again that I talked about earlier. Okay, so now it's prompted me to basically locate this model file onto this 2D model onto my 3D part. I want to basically align it within space. So one thing that can be very helpful with this is using this camera tool. It'll toggle between different views of the CAD model. So it'll give me like a top view, a bottom view, a front view, a rear view, left view, and so on and so forth. Another thing that's really helpful is as I select my 2D image, it'll give me the option to rotate about the different axes. So in this instance, I want to rotate about the x-axis by 90 degrees. And the y-axis by 90 degrees. So now I've basically kind of lined it up with the model. As far as, you know, it's almost like a cross-sectional view, right? So if I had an engineering drawing that was a cross-sectional view, and I have maybe a shell model, I could load this in like so. Click on my model. And then if I hold down the control key, I can just click and drag until this is maybe at the cross section of the wings here. You may notice as I'm dragging this over on the left, my X, Y, and Z numbers are changing for this. So if I know a specific station plane, waterline, or butt line for my engineering drawing, I can go ahead and type these into here as well. I've also got, besides these buttons for changing the rotation, I can change my rotation values in here to be exact. You know, if I need something other than 90 degrees increments, I can type in a direct rotation into here as well. There we go. I've kind of got it at a cross section of the wings. If I get a top view, I can go ahead and hold down. If I just click and drag, it thinks I want to pan the entire model. So anytime you see this blue bar up at the top, it's instructing me, you know, what I need to do to perform the operations that this window is helping me for. So in many, many places throughout NLign, you'll see that I need to hold down Control to move or place something on a model. Because if I just click, it thinks I want to pan. So you go ahead and hold down Control, and then I can click and drag my picture to kind of align on the model where I want it to be. There we go. I've got a cross-sectional, you know, if this was an engineering drawing, I've got a kind of a cross-sectional view of the aircraft right here. So I don't need, you know, every single detail of my aircraft or my parts to be modeled into NLign. I can just use, you know, engineering drawings or other 2D pieces of information to create a model where I can start recording data into NLign. One of the things to troubleshoot, if you're at this step and this picture is black, then you've, in the previous step, you forgot to load in your JPEG with your NLign model file. So I've done that a few times where I've come to here, I'm like, well, hey, how come this is black? How come I don't have my picture in here? And that's why, is because in the previous model file step, um, you didn't load in the JPEG file as well. And that's right here. So if you forgot to load in your JPEG and you just loaded in your NLign model file, then you would get the error that I talked about with the black picture. On the alignment. And then once you're done, you can go ahead and hit save on the alignment. And it's going to ask you, where would you like to save this alignment file? And then I go ahead and, oh, whoops, this is just for the folder. And then hit OK. And then it will save this NTXM model type, or file type. And go ahead and close that out. And then finally, I can do like I did previously, and in my asset editor, edit assets, 2D asset example. I can load in my 2D models. So I've got my JPEG, my NLign model file, and my transformation file. And I need to make sure that my NLign model file is the primary file. If I go to File Assets, File Select Assets, I have the option to select both the assets at the same time. And now I can see my 2D asset on top of my 3D asset right here as well. I can toggle that on and off, just like the visibility of parts. And so that's one reason why some people load portions of their aircraft or of their aircraft model files, portions of their data into separate assets, is once you start to get large pieces of information into your assets, it can slow down your load times. So if you have, let's say, full-scale flight test fatigue data in one asset, maybe not a lot of your engineers, or maybe not a lot of your engineers from your group are accessing that information. You can have that in a separate asset. So when you load up NLign and select which assets you want to be working on, they don't have to load absolutely the entire aircraft or absolutely every single record that has ever been created for your fleet, of aircraft in the same session. So dividing up into different assets can be helpful in that regard, such that you can speed up certain processes, certain groups' time to load in models and data, in that they don't have to load absolutely everything all at once. Now, you can stick everything into one asset. For example, I have, in this UAV asset, I do have a 2D model loaded in here as well. So in this example, in my UAV asset, I've got a 2D model that you can see shown at kind of the base of the aircraft. I can hide that. I've got my basically CAD models here of my different parts. I can hide that. And I've also got a finite element model of the wing right here. You can see it's a little bit tessellated with all the different finite element IDs. So like I was talking about, you can turn on and off these different models within your asset to kind of see different pieces of information. One of the things that I did when I was working in manufacturing was I brought in some of the tooling for some of the different parts. So if your department works a lot with repairs and there's a tooling jig or some other fixture that you do a lot of repairs on, it may behoove you to bring in some of the information, some of the model of that jig or that tooling, so you can see if there's any discrepancies that correlate to specific features on that jig or that tool. As an example, in manufacturing, we found we were getting a lot of defects in a certain area, and we did that. We loaded in some of the tooling information, and we saw that those defects correlated with a feature on the tool. We went out and looked at that specific tool that a lot of the parts were coming off of with defects, and we found that there was some issues with that feature. So we had it serviced, and the defects went away. So it saved us a lot of heartache and grief by figuring that out, by loading in some of the different models that were associated with our parts. Like I mentioned, we were manufacturing a lot of carbon fiber. So another thing that we did was we loaded in the carbon fiber manufacturing splice lines. And we were getting a lot of voids in the carbon fiber. And when we compared the void location to the splice lines, we found that some of them were very correlated. So we moved some of the splice lines further apart, so there wasn't so much of a drop off in the carbon fiber, and our voids went away as well. So having different models inside of your assets can be very helpful for root cause analysis, drawing correlations between where you're getting defects and some of your processes. Yeah, so I know, several of our customers have done that where they've split up assets by, for some platforms, there's dual contracting or dual manufacturers for large portions of the aircraft. So, for example, the forward fuselage was manufactured by one company, and the aft fuselage was manufactured by another. They would divide the assets up by who was manufacturing it, type of a deal. For some of the others, like I mentioned, they would divide up maybe like a shell model into one asset, the detail parts into another asset, and then the data, the actual trendables, into yet another third asset. Just like you said, for optimization of load times for what you're specifically working with.
I don't know if there's time for a question to try and clarify the distinction between trendable types, and what models, or not models, but assets they're tied to.
Sure.
I'm not exactly sure how to properly phrase the question. So right now with one of our projects, we've got, I think I've improperly organized the trendable types, because I've been assigning trendable types to specific assets, just so I can quickly load / unload. It makes the organization, but I realize I've kind of handicapped myself, because when I go to, if I'm looking to build additional trendable types, I'm slowly running out of fields. So I see that I need to actually make a trendable type capable for all assets, correct? And then you have different trendables for the different types of assets.
So let's say one type of trendable type is crack, right? Just as an example, right?
Right.
And for a crack trendable type, you have different fields that you fill in to record information about the crack. What's the tail number the crack was found on? What was the part number the crack was found on? What was the length of the crack? Who found the crack? Things like that. So, but all those are blank, right, in the trendable type configuration. Once you start to fill in that information, what aircraft was the crack found on? What, aircraft A, okay. What's the tail number? 1, 2, 3, 4. What was the length of the crack? It was 2.125 inches. Who found it? Jane Doe found it. So once that information is filled out, it's a trendable and it lives on an asset. But the trendable types, as you're configuring and setting up the different fields, oh, I need a link. Oh, I need to record this. I need to record that. As you're setting up and configuring this trendable type, remember that this trendable type can live up, once you fill it out, can live upon any asset in the system. So yeah, you only have a set number of fields for the database. So you may want to look at, let's say you've got 3 different aircraft that you have contracts with, or in your, 3 different aircraft types in your fleet. You may want to look at the cracked trendable type and say, oh, for this specific aircraft, we need an extra piece of information recorded for the cracked trendable type. And so maybe there's a handful of fields that are only filled out if they're on a certain aircraft, right? But maybe 98% of the other fields are all shared across your separate assets. So it's something you want to look at and think about combining some of your trendable types, maybe. We can do that next week.
Okay. So just in kind of in general, if you set up a trendable type for multiple assets, but say one of those assets that there is a group of trendables that either had some wrong information entered or whatever the reason you want to like start over with that group, how would you go about like either deleting all those to that specific asset and then re-uploading those without affecting other assets? I don't know if that makes sense, but
if you delete a specific piece of data that's filled out, right, that's not going to affect your trendable type. That's not going to affect other record types and other assets. Let me do this.
Like, is there a way to well, I know you can bulk upload.
Yes. You want to bulk delete, basically?
Yeah. How would you go about bulk deleting without having to select each one individually?
So let's say, for example, you have this trendable type that's called crack, right? Similar to deleting an asset, if you go into the trendable type and delete that specific trendable type, it will go in and delete out your specific trendables that you filled out for that piece of information, for that trendable type.
Okay.
That makes sense? So, let's say in the past I created a trendable type called crack, and then I fill out the information for that crack on this asset, and on this asset, it's got specific data in there, information about the crack. If I go into my trendable type configuration and I delete the crack trendable type, all the data associated with that trendable type is going to be deleted.
Across every asset.
Across all the assets, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's one way you can do it. If you have any data that you care about, I'd be very careful with doing that.
Right.
Because you're going to blow everything away, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So what I might recommend is, I would probably first do an export.
Just so that you save everything in case.
So that I save everything. So let's say, I've got a crack. Let's call this asset. Here, this is why I duplicated this. Let's call this asset A10. And let's call this asset, I don't know. Let's say this is an asset for A10, right?
Right.
And this is an asset for F15. And you basically got a trendable type called crack for A10s. And then you've got another one, trendable type crack for F15s, right? And basically, you look at these and you're like, hey, we really only need one that's called crack. We don't need cracks on A10s and a trendable type called cracks on F15s. We really just need one. So what I would do is I'd export all the data for one specific asset. Let's just call it F15.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd export that data. So I've got, piece of information 4565, right? Then I come in and delete all my Trendable type called cracks for F15s. And then as soon as I delete that, this is going to disappear, right? This specific Trendable with this information.
Right.
Then what I do is maybe I rename this. This is just cracks in general. Maybe I add another field to make it that's maybe there's just like one field that's specific to F15. So I add that field into my Trendable type. Then on my import, all I have to do is on this CSV file, all I need to do is change the Trendable type to cracks in my CSV and make sure my column headers are the same as the Trendable type, like general cracks Trendable. And then I just do an import, and then I get my information back into my F15, and that Trendable type will be called cracks. And we were actually going to jump into Trendable management, so that was kind of a nice segue. So we talked about assets. The other major category of how to divide up your database is Trendable types. So Trendables consist of, kind of back to the paper form idea. A Trendable type could be a nonconformance, it could be a crack, it could be a defect type. It's basically any type of record that you want to fill out would be a Trendable type. So if there's any paper forms that you consistently fill out, you can convert those paper forms into a Trendable type. And so contained within the Trendable are fields, right? So fields are just pieces of information that you want to record about that nonconformance or about that specific record type. So you can think of fields as the blank lines on your form or the blank boxes that need to be filled in. The check boxes, the places where you write in information, your name, dates, record numbers, length, different measurements about parts, things like that. And then within NLign, there's one very specific field. One of the most powerful fields is called the list field. So that could be like a drop-down list. What's the state abbreviation for that you want input into this field? So two very special types of fields are linked and copied fields. So linked fields basically inherit attributes from the Trendable they're linked to, and they update when the parent is updated. So Trendable types can represent any type of data or record. So in this one, we've got a Trendable called parent, right? And then we record some specific pieces of information about this parent. What's the family income? What's the eye color of the parent? What's the height? What was their date of birth? And then we've got another Trendable type called child. And we've got a linked field of family income. So whatever the household income is with the combined parental income, the child will be updated. As soon as the parent or the parents get a raise or their income changes, the child field that talks about family income will be updated as soon as the parent or records are updated. Now there's copied fields, and so in this example, they've got a copied eye color. So child 1 copies the eye color of the parent. And child 2 copies the height of the parent. So copied fields are different from linked fields in that if the parent or the parents change their eye color, it's Halloween, they put in some contacts, the child is not going to update their eye color when the parent or parent's eye color changes. So only the fields that are linked get updated. So the fields that are copied get filled or populated when the child is created. So in this case, when the child is born. An example of where that might be helpful is for like on a tool, fixture, or jig. We were talking a little bit about repairs or manufacturing, and parts get put onto a jig or get manufactured on some tooling. It can be very useful to say, part A got repaired or manufactured on a specific tool fixture, and you want to copy over from the tool fixture trendable type the last service date of that tool. So we could have the tool fixture service date as well as the date that this part A was manufactured, and we can check to see if this tool was within its service date. So part B here has a tool fixture service date of 2005. So we can look at that and say, hey, at the point in time where part B was manufactured, this tool was actually out of its servicing date. So that might be why part B has a discrepancy on it. Whereas with part A, it looks like when it was manufactured or repaired, its service date was up to date. So when this changes, we don't want these fields to update. We want this to stay 5/5/2005 when this part was created. Does that kind of make sense? The difference between linked and copied fields?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, now we've got a little test. So we've got one trendable type called employee, and here's some of the fields that we're going to record for employees. What's their name, their phone number, who's their manager, what building number are they in, and when was their orientation training. And then we've got another trendable type that talks about their work group, right? Is it maybe the systems group is one group, stress is another group, design is another group. And so within this trendable type work group, they've got fields such as who's the manager for that group, what building number is that work group in, and when was the last orientation date or the last training date held. So which of these fields should be linked? Basically, which of these fields for the employee should it inherit from the parent and be updated? And which of these fields should be copied from the parent record when the employee record is created, but not updated? So first of all, which of these fields on the left here should be linked fields? Do you have an idea of which of these fields should be updated when the work group fields get updated?
So I believe that the manager should be a linked field because the manager can be updated. And I guess technically speaking, the building number should be as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly which one would be a copy field.
So I would argue that orientation training should be a copied field. Let's say, for example, this group has, in their orientation training, they have they go over safety or inputting hours for your time card. And so one of the things that they can do is they can go through their employee list and see what orientation training the employee had. And if the employee had the updated safety training, they don't have to pull them in for, they can go through and find out who didn't have the updated orientation for the new safety protocols or for the new timekeeping system. And so I would argue that this should just be copied over. So when the employee comes on board and they have some onboarding training, they just copy over whatever that orientation training was. So then you could go through and see, who was their trainer, did they get the updated safety training, things of that nature. So that might be an instance of where you'd want, a copied field.
Good
Can you think of an example just for aircraft? I mean, it makes sense with children and employees, but I'm just trying to think of an aircraft example.
Aircraft specific, I know, but man, going between different, let's say hypothetically, your aircraft has multiple models that you want split up into different assets. and say you want to say like a type C or a type A aircraft, and you decide to split that up into two different assets. So if you want to create a trendable type that covers both of those, but you have different data on the different assets, how do you recognize what fields you want linked between updating different asset or between the different trendable types, and what you want copied or what you just want by itself for that specific asset?
So let's say we've got a trendable type called inspection data, right? And so the inspector comes up, he's starting to perform an inspection. He records the tail number, the inspection date, his name, maybe what aircraft rev or type it is. And then he starts to go and starts recording the findings. And so let's say he has multiple different findings. Instead of just the 2 boxes here, maybe he has 20 different findings. He finds dents, he finds cracks, he finds all kinds of stuff, right? And so some of the stuff he's going to be recording is defect type. He might record like size of the defect. And so these would just be things that he inputs directly. But for each finding, he also wants to know what the tail number was for this specific defect. What was the date that this defect was found? Who was the inspector that found it? What was the aircraft rev or type that he found it on? So basically, all these fields that I've listed here on the parent, I want them on the child as well, right? So I would argue, in this case, all of these are probably going to be linked fields. If someone comes back and says, "Oh, whoops, I accidentally, had the wrong tail number or the wrong inspector on here," then the children would update directly. There's not a ton of instances where a copied field makes sense. I tried to show one of them where, on the tooling jig, where you only want to grab the information as the child is created, right? And then it keeps updating in the future. One of them, I guess another example might be like aircraft flight hours. Let's say you've got a trendable called like aircraft configuration. In this, you have the tail number, you have something like, you might even have like major, let's say you have a wing serial number. Let's say you can swap out the wings on this aircraft. You might have flight hours. So, when you create a finding and you want to grab some of this aircraft configuration number, your tail number is probably going to be linked. If someone made a typo for this tail number, you want that to be updated. But as you're swapping out wings, I don't want copyright. There we go. As you swap out the wings and as the flight hours are updating, I only want those to be copied as soon as a defect is found, because I only record this finding once, but the aircraft trendable type gets updated periodically with new flight hours, with a new wing serial number as parts get swapped in and out, with the different, maybe it even has like a different base location. And then let's actually grab these. So one of the things I like to do when I'm setting up, I'm just going to have this representative of all their findings here, and there's multiple. So one of the things I like to do is I like to put in kind of in parentheses, like I'm doing here, that some of these fields are linked or copied, right? So the fields that are directly stored or directly input, I just leave blank, and then on the child, at the end of the field that is linked or copied, I put this little annotation that, hey, this is going to be a linked field, this is going to be a copied field, this is going to be a copied field. Base location, that's probably going to be another copy. So, because basically anytime you're updating the parent and you don't want the children to update, that's when you would want a copied field. If you do want the children to update when the parent gets updated, then you want a linked field. So tail number would be linked just in case someone puts in a typo or something. The wing serial number, as you're swapping it in and out, you want this let's say you find a defect on the wing, you want whatever wing was on the aircraft at the date that this was created to be in here, not whatever wing is currently on the aircraft, right? Because let's say at the next base or at the next inspection, they swap out the wing and there's a new serial number. So this finding was not on that new wing; it was on the old wing serial number, right? So that's a copied field. Okay, let's go ahead and stop there for now. Next week we'll come back and we'll talk a little more about trendable types, linked copied fields. It is kind of a vast subject and takes a while to understand. So we'll talk more about that next week, as well as kind of setting up some of your different trendable types. We'll actually get into the software and set up some of these fields. But I always recommend to all the customers, as you're thinking about the different data that you have, kind of draw out something like I've done right here, where you kind of spell it out on a slide or on a whiteboard or some type of document, where you kind of work through the different pieces of information that you're going to be recording. And that can really help not only yourself, but can help you communicate to your team how you're going to be recording different pieces of information.